we must never forget that no government schemes are going to perfect man. We know that living in this world means dealing with what philosophers would call the phenomenology of evil, or as theologians would put it, the doctrine of sin. There is sin and evil in the world, and we're enjoined by Scripture and the Lord Jesus to oppose it with all our might.
Coming to you live from the corner of Fauci and Burks on Constitution on Fire Avenue, it's the America Held Hostage podcast. America's Constitution in Quarantine. Now here are your hosts, Jeff Dornik and John Hinton.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of America Held Hostage podcast. For those of you guys that tuned in over the weekend, we had a lot of success and a lot of fun with the Saving America conference that we hosted. Some amazing speakers and panels. For me, the highlight was really the pastors panel that we had with Pastor Sam Jones. We had Greg Locke, Dr. Mike Spalding, and Ken Peters all in one panel, and they really brought it but really articulated, protecting our constitutional rights from a pastoral standpoint. And so that was a fascinating conversation. We're going to be posting the videos onto YouTube of each of the individual talks. There are definitely some talks that you guys are going to want to hear. It's a lot of information, but it's really going to help you to understand what's actually going on out in the world, how to articulate our conservative beliefs and that sort of thing. So definitely stay in the loop. If you want more information, go to AmericanConservativeMovement.com. You can sign up for our email list, and you can get information there. Well, John, I know, again, this weekend I feel like there were so many news stories, like literally, my DMs were full. I was trying to keep up on the stories you were sending over because there's so much information. That's the life we're in today.
Everything is going at the speed of sound. We open this podcast up every morning talking about how much news we have happening, and it's just too much sometimes to wrap your head around. I can't get my little pea-sized brain around it. So we're just going to start. I'm going to start the timer on my phone, so that way we don't bleed over past like an hour and 5 minutes, but we're going to get through as much as we can. We're going to stop at 4 or 5 stories, talk about it. I have some breaking news that I need to share, and then you had a story that you just that one of your little birdies that used to work in intelligence just sent over to you. Pardon me. A little birdie of mine that works in the Illinois Department of Health. This has not been announced. He got an internal memo, texted it to me, said share it on the podcast. I can't find this anywhere in media, so this is breaking news to the America Held Hostage podcast from a little birdie of mine that I've personally known for over a decade that works in the Illinois Department of Health. Governor J.B. Pritzker will announce later today that the Illinois National Guard will deploy to enforce quarantines to nursing homes and disabled person homes. He said, you didn't hear that from me. He said staffing shortages and staff that weren't working or that were working weren't using proper protective measures. So they weren't caring for those who were the most vulnerable. So once again, a source inside the Illinois Department of Health is telling us that Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker will announce later today that the Illinois National Guard will be deployed, their medical units, to aid in the quarantining of nursing homes and disabled person homes. Your initial thoughts on that, Jeff, because I think this is a backdoor way of governors there that lean left of center, that if you're not going to walk lockstep into what they're saying and doing, you need to comply. they're going to find a way to make you comply.
Yeah, well, and see, here's the thing is that I feel like if we were going to be quarantining anybody from the very beginning, it should have been the people that are elderly and have pre-existing conditions, and that sort of thing. And I think that maybe what had happened is because we had done a broad quarantine among everybody, I'm wondering if maybe a lot of the workers there didn't take things as seriously because it was so broad and so overreaching and things like that. Whereas if we're like, no, we got to protect these people that are elderly. We got to protect these people with diabetes, with lung disease, with cancer, with immunity issues and things like that. I feel like maybe we could have protected them more. As opposed to doing this, it's almost like everything kind of got watered down across the board because everybody was in quarantine. And I wonder if it made it less urgent to care for those people that need it. I wish that they would have done essentially this from day one instead of waiting till after they're already quarantining everybody. And it's kind of like, it's a little late now.
It's like the horse is already out of the barn.
Yeah.
And then to have the National Guard deployed to enforce it, for me, it just sends the wrong visual. It's the wrong optics to a society that's already on edge, and you're already seeing your way of life and your constitutional liberties be threatened. Do I think it's the right thing? Probably. Do I think that that's something that probably should have been done from the beginning, and you did it with a scalpel rather than a full just blanket across the state or the country? Absolutely.
Yeah.
You wanted to get to a story that one of your little birdies shared with you. It was something from 60 Minutes Australia talking about a lawsuit that the government of Australia is getting ready to launch against the Communist Chinese Party government.
Yeah, well, so I literally got this text right before we went live, and so I haven't had a chance to watch the video, but reading the description was interesting. And it actually isn't the nation of Australia. But it's actually a class action lawsuit in the United States. So here's what this here's what this says. It says the true cost of the coronavirus pandemic, the loss of life, and the economic devastation is incalculable. But what can be counted is the money governments around the world have already spent trying to combat. So far, it adds up to a staggering $6.5 trillion. In a class action launched in the United States, China is now being sued to get the money back. The lawsuit accuses Chinese authorities of negligence, lies, and cover-ups. In the UK, there are similar calls for compensation to be paid. And as Tara Brown reports, even here in Australia, there are demands that the communist regime face a Nuremberg-style hearing to investigate its role in the human disaster. I find this fascinating, especially with how we've seen China really focused on trying to cover things up. I'm hoping that if this class action lawsuit actually goes to court, I'm not sure where it would go to court, how it would be, whether it be public or private or whatever it is, but maybe we could actually get some information that they seem to be hiding and covering from our government. And also, too, it's going to be really interesting to see how financially this works out in how China is moving forward as well.
On top that are willing to come forward and testify against their own party, I would give them American citizenship and diplomatic immunity to be able to expose and smuggle them out through the CIA, SEAL Team 6, the Rangers, any sort of black ops organization. If we have intelligence gatherers inside China that can help us in exposing what happened, I'd be all for it. Two things. China owns $1 trillion of America's national debt in U.S. treasuries. By a pen and a phone, the President of the United States could just say that debt's forgiven right now. Those treasuries are you're never getting them back. We're never paying you back. That's part of your payment towards us. Plus, I'll have to find the story, but there were loans that China took out in the 1920s that when you account for inflation, China has never paid back to the United States. So we own sovereign debt of China. And with inflation, that accounts to over $1 trillion as well. And I've seen Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA advocate that $1 trillion should be forced to be paid by the U.S. government, asking and demanding that the Chinese Communist Party pay that as well. And that those would be two ways to help offset the cost. I think that would be a start in the right direction, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. For me, I think it's important that we find every possible angle in order to offset the cost that we've experienced because of Chinese inept response to this.
I also would say to add to that, another great idea would be giving tax breaks and incentives to American-owned companies to leave China, come back to America, repatriate here, and you get not tax credits, but you get tax breaks to be able to come back to the country and remanufacture those products in America, because you're going to need products that people can consume, and you're going to need to rebuild the manufacturing base. And I think that would be a good way of not only helping to rebuild your economy, but also sticking it to China as well, because they make 70% of the world's goods. You take 20% of that and bring it back here to America, then you're creating 20% of the world's goods yourself. And the 20 million people that have lost jobs, because some of those jobs aren't coming back.
Right.
Let's just be honest. They're not coming back. If people find out that a third of those jobs can be done from home, and we've already found that out through studies, then that means there's going to be less travel, there's going to be less food consumption at fast food places, there's going to be less convenience stores, there's going to be less oil changes. The ripple effect is going to be seen. In order for those people to have jobs, you could begin I would hope that Trump would begin a new Manhattan project to repatriate manufacturing, and you would be able to do both in about a 2-year time frame. You can rebuild the economy, put people back to work, and stick it to China, because that is the economic fallout of what they've done. And I would tell them, if you want to cause more harm by causing disruptions with military saber rattling, we will use any and every means known to man, up to nukes. And you force them up to the table, and you have to make it. You either say, "Am I bluffing?" And I think that's the only way that you're going to be able to stare these guys down, because the one thing that communists and leftists don't want to do is die. They just don't. We're seeing it now in our country, that we're panicking so much because people in our own culture have a morbid fear of their own mortality. And they've been worked over by the pagan progressive spirit of the age. So we're doing these draconian means because we don't want to die. And now we're finding out that the death rate, we'll allude to this in a future story, the death rate, according to Stanford, of this virus is 50 to 85 times less lethal than first thought. Shocking. I think that answers your entire question.
Yeah.
So we'll move forward, but I think that those are some highlights and some points that I think you're going to see conservatives use as talking points moving forward if you're discerning and reading the tea leaves.
Yep.
But I digress.
Very true. Very true.
The Epoch Times reported, we didn't get to this story on Thursday, but they reported on Thursday that Smithfield Foods, and we've alluded to this. My little birdie said, you guys have talked about Smithfield Foods the last 3 podcasts. Yeah, because when you're the largest pork producer in America and you're shutting off the spigot for 5% of meals in America, I'm going to keep hammering you every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Smithfield Foods, a wholly owned subsidiary of Chinese group company WH Group, and the world's largest pork producer, not just America's, the world's largest pork producer, announced that it will close 2 more U.S. plants after dozens more workers were tested positive for the Chinese coronavirus. Now we're finding out they shut down a Tyson Foods plant in Tama, Iowa. There are now calls in my backyard that I saw from KCRG Channel 9, the ABC affiliate in Eastern Iowa, that in my backyard where I went to school at the University of Northern Iowa, there's a Tyson plant in Waterloo, and they've had a big outbreak of coronavirus there. And now 14 local officials are petitioning the governor to shut down that essential business. And it's basically a chicken processing poultry facility. The dirty little secret behind all of these, because I grew up in that neck of the woods, the dirty little secret behind all these meat processing plants is the majority of them are worked by people who have huge rap sheets, or they're here illegally.
Cheap labor. That's the reality of it, and that's where I always say it is really important to support like local farmers. People that are manufacturing their own food. A lot of times they pay better. They've got better employees. They've got better practices. They're cleaner. They're not using as many chemicals. But then also too, a lot of times you're not going to deal with a lot of these huge, massive outbreaks, and then also a lot of the importations that a lot of the big companies do from places like China and Mexico and third world countries and things like that. So just from that alone, safety level, go with your local farmer. It's going to be much, much better.
I would agree. My grandpa was a farmer in north central Iowa for 40 years. Never once growing up in the 10 years that I was alive that I saw him on our family farm did I ever see him use any sort of cheap migrant labor.
Yep.
And he was always the guy that was at the local farmer's market selling his crops. And he did it with the sweat of his own back. And he worked with his sons and his grandsons. I was one of them. I was 9, 10 years old, and I was out there pulling weeds in over 100 acres. He just refused to use migrant labor because as a Christian, he thought that it was ungodly to use what he used the term, what he called it to me. He said, if I were to use migrant labor, it would be like backdoor slavery. So if you hear me use that term from now on the podcast, I get that from my late grandfather. He absolutely hated it. And he hated the fact that after he retired, we started seeing corporate farms start coming into Wright County, Iowa. And Wright County, Iowa is the largest pork producing county in the country. We have over 22 million hogs in the county. We have 15,000 residents. I grew up there for 25 years. It is the largest pork producing county in the country. And the thing is that when my grandpa retired, we started seeing these corporate owned farms start flooding in 1993. And what they did was they brought cheap labor from Mexico and South America to do the work. And they were literally busing people in after NAFTA. Literally. And it was abhorrent. And now we have a rampant problem, not just with illegal immigration, but we have a problem with sex trafficking in my neck of the woods there about 27 years later. It's evil. It's evil. So we get to the next story. The U.S. Daily Mail says that Washington, D.C. will extend its city's lockdown for 3 more weeks until May 16th. So thoughts and prayers to the 666 area code. Or if you follow the Hunger Games movie trilogy, it's District 1. Jake Tapper of The Lead on CNN reports that the UK has extended stay-at-home orders until at least May 7th. The U.S. Daily Mail reports, and this was horrifying, this was in New York City. The video shows a horrifying moment where a homeless man was engulfed in flames after a cyclist poured fuel on him and set him on fire. The evil that's just starting to run rampant, Jeff, out in the open. something wicked this way comes. And it's like people are finding new ways to invent evil. And dare I say, that is biblical. That's Romans 1. Sean Davis of the Federalist broke the story Thursday night. Newly declassified Inspector General footnotes reveal that the FBI was repeatedly told that Christopher Steele's infamous dossier was paid for with Clinton campaign cash and was full of Russian disinformation. So we've buried the lead. After 3 years of having to hear about Russian collusion and Ukrainian impeachment, Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, the dirty little secret comes out. It was all a hoax from the beginning. So the same experts that are telling you now we have to lock you down in order to kill the virus were the same people that were telling you that Trump was a Russian agent. Do not trust any of them. They're lying to you. They're lying to you about the lethality of this virus. They're lying to you about how many deaths are linked to the virus, because we've already talked about in a previous podcast, the NYC is now just estimating, people that have symptoms and we think have the virus and died, but we're not really sure.
Yeah, well, and one thing I just really want to say about this issue is that, time after time after time, conservatives and conservative, pundits and commentators and things like that have been proven true when it comes to all of these hoaxes, and that goes for the like Russian collusion hoax, the Ukraine hoax. Like literally every single time that the left is pushing something. I mean, even look at Kavanaugh, same thing. Like every single time we're proven true, but then, like you said, then the headline is buried in these stories that nobody's really ever going to see. And so, it's one of those things where the bad information gets out there and widespread because it fits the leftist narrative, but then the actual truth gets buried and nobody really ever sees it.
Yeah, kind of like they had Kavanaugh and his Christine Blasey Ford's accusations of him sexually assaulting her on the front page of the New York Times. And last week when Tara Reid comes out as a former Biden staffer and says that she was sexually assaulted by the senator in 1993, that story is found on page A22.
Yep, sounds about right.
Michael McKee on Twitter tweeted out a great graph, but the graph showed what we've seen in jobless claims over the last 4 weeks. So I thought it was a great tweet. We weren't able to get to it Thursday or Friday. I want to allude to it now. Wrap your head around this. Jobless claims the last 3 weeks, 16,780,000, plus 5.5 million that came out Thursday of last week would equal 22.28 million jobs lost. The total number of jobs created since the 2008-2009 Great Recession, 22.09 million. That means in 4 weeks, 10 years of job creation has been completely wiped out. Staggering, Jeff.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, I mean, at a certain point, what do you expect when you shut down the entire economy? And what was interesting is I was watching some of the press briefings with the White House, and the reporters kept making it seem like, that all of these job losses are Trump's fault. And I'm like, last I checked, it was the governors who essentially shut down the country. So let's be real about who's actually at fault here.
And by the way, are people not using critical thinking skills to understand that the press is defeating their own arguments? They called for Trump to shut down the entire country to save us from the virus, and then he didn't, and the governors did. And now they're saying, well, you don't have the authority to start it up all yourself, So they wanted him to have the authority before, but now they're saying that he doesn't have the authority now, and now they're saying he's the cause of the job losses when in fact he let that go to the governors, and the governors are responsible. Makes absolutely no sense. But yet they have an agenda. They have a worldview and a bias.
It makes absolutely no sense unless you're a leftist, and then it makes perfect logical sense.
Yeah, because when you're untethered from truth, then you can form your own truth. And the world is as you see it. Facts don't matter because your feelings matter. Well, as Ben Shapiro has so famously said, facts don't care about your feelings. USA Today, mega droughts. And you guys have been experiencing a mega drought out in California for the last 2 decades, Jeff. But USA Today reported Thursday night, mega droughts defined as intense droughts that last for decades or longer appear to be coming back. Yikes. That's what we need when we're about to experience a food shortage in the coming months. The U.S. Daily Mail reporting Netflix is now worth more than Disney, climbing to a value of $187 billion. Now, I sent you a little tweet. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. This is just thought-provoking for me. But it started trending on Twitter Thursday night. A tweet from 14 years ago by Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey. Now I'll just read it to you. I think it's sadly enlightening, and it's disconcerting. Jack Dorsey tweeted May 24th, 2006, making the good pasta, reading through some amazing parts of the satanic verses. The golden threads begin to intertwine. I don't know what that means. I have allusions to what I think it means if you've watched some documentaries. But the fact that he's talking about reading satanic verses, that's what freaked me out, Jeff.
Yeah, well, you know, that's the thing about a lot of the elites and things like that. That makes this so shocking is just the fact that usually they try to allude to things, they hint at things. They've got kind of subliminal messaging, but for him to come out and just be so blatant and out there, that's what kind of makes it so surprising, I think. It's one of those things and I know you were alluding to some documentaries. I know that there was the recent one, Out of Shadows, where they talk a lot about a lot of these, they're using certain words that really mean something else. And that's something that we need to be aware of. It doesn't mean that we be conspiracy theorists and we just follow every single time somebody says something and act like it's always a secret word. But when it's strange wording and things like that, it's definitely concerning, especially when he's coming flat out and talking about satanic verses and passages and things like that. So, definitely concerning there.
To anyone who hasn't watched Out of Shadows, if you know everything about the Jeffrey Epstein case and how things unfolded there, there's a lot of questions surrounding his death, and also just how many people were actually involved that had world power and influence and prestige that were in his inner circle. So when you combine that with the Out of Shadows documentary, it's like 2 pegs to a stool. But if you combine it with a documentary that has been up on Vimeo, Vimeo, called An Open Secret, it's won several documentary awards. It interviews several people in Hollywood that talk about how there is a rampant pedophilia problem in Hollywood. They interview Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, Elijah Wood, and talk about how there is a problem, and that's the third leg of the stool. So if you know about the Epstein case, you watch Out of Shadows, and then you watch An Open Secret, you're going to see that there is a seedy underbelly to the entertainment industry, and it allows you to discern and put things together that It would originally, you would just think is a conspiracy theory, but when you watch that a critically acclaimed, award-winning documentary, An Open Secret, it makes you put everything together, and it's the third leg to that stool. So I'd highly recommend that. The Family Research Council is reporting Virginia Governor Ralph Northam last week quietly signed into law a bill opening all public women's bathrooms, locker rooms, showers, and dressing rooms to men who claim they are women. That's fine, Jeff. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here at all. Governor Clan Robes Blackface just taking away more common sense and constitutional rights and putting your way of life in jeopardy. But nothing to see here.
Yeah, again, this is the problem with government getting too involved in a lot of these areas and pushing actual ideologies, not just allowing freedom, not allowing liberty. Because I mean, technically, like, hey, if a private business wants to do what they want to do with a restroom, let them do it, and then people can decide whether they want to go there or not. But when you start having the government involved with things, that's when you're like, okay, take a step back. Let's protect freedom, liberty, and our constitutional rights.
Amen. Wall Street Journal reported Thursday night, Rite Aid executives are saying that the drugstore chain has seen a sharp rise in sales of hydroxychloroquine, the prescription malaria medicine that President Trump has touted during the coronavirus pandemic, despite some public health concerns. Of course, you've seen a sharp rise because of the fear porn, and people don't want to come down with the virus. Bloomberg News reports that in your own backyard, Jeff, California now faces a budget shortfall that could top $35 billion. What's Gavin Newsom going to do? Is he going to raise taxes? He's going to lose jobs. We'll allude to another story. Half of Los Angelinos are out of work right now.
Yeah, I'm surprised that's not a higher number. I mean, in all reality, with the way that the lockdown's going and all that kind of stuff. But I think that the thing that we need to remember is that this stay-at-home order is affecting a lot. There's a lot of repercussions, and there's going to be a lot that we're going to have to deal with. A lot of these governments and these states that are doing this are going to have to completely redo their budget, or they're going to have to raise taxes significantly in order to make up for this. And so what's going to be interesting is they're going to have a decision. We can either take the conservative route and we can cut out all the extra stuff. We can cut out the welfare. We can cut out all of the things that conservatives have been talking about for the longest time, lower the budget, and then we can make up things that way. Or we can go the progressive way and raise taxes. Now, which direction do you think Gavin Newsom's going to go?
He's going to raise taxes. Across the country, conservatives need to be asking for a cut in government, and you can start at the top by abolishing the Department of Education.
Yep.
And then you can go from there. Then start with maybe the Department of Energy and then the EPA. But I digress. Breaking 911 tweeted Thursday night that the Department of Homeland Security has issued an environmental waiver to expedite the building of the border wall in Texas because they've built 116 miles. They want to get another 400 done by the end of the year. So I say more cowbell, Jeff.
Yep, we need that, and again, like I keep saying, it's like we need to really secure our borders, and that's both legally and illegally right now, especially when we're dealing with something like coronavirus. And the only way that we can actually control who's coming in and leaving our country is if we can secure the border, and that's going to be with a wall. I can't think of any other way, really.
I would agree. WGN TV out of Chicago reporting that millions of masks that were purchased by the state of Illinois from China are not usable on the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic after multiple states have recalled similar equipment for being faulty. Go figure that the Chinese are giving you faulty equipment.
Stop buying from China. Like I don't know how to keep saying this. I mean, they're the reason we're in this mess, and then we're gonna go back and we're gonna buy the stuff from the country who gave us the mess. Makes absolutely no sense. You know, there's plenty of other companies, plenty of other people that can do it, not in China. Maybe we pay an extra dollar here and there, whatever it is, but we need to stop supporting China. You know, even just on principle.
I would agree. The International Monetary Fund chief economist tells CNBC that the global economy may not fully recover from the coronavirus by 2021. In other news, water is wet and the sky is blue. If you think that this is going to be a V-shaped recovery and you're going to be back to normal by September or October, that would only happen if governments got out of the way. And you've talked about that last week, Jeff. But governments aren't going to get out of the way. They're going to double down. They're going to triple down. They're going to expand programs. They're going to try and stimulate the economy. To which I say, I got a $1,200 stimulus check, Jeff. How can I stimulate the economy when businesses are closed? That makes absolutely no sense. Nobody's even talking about that. I told that to my wife last night and said, wait a minute. We got $2,400 in stimulus as a married couple. That's supposed to stimulate the economy. That's what stimulus means. But how can we stimulate the economy when all the businesses are closed? That makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah. Well,
and yet you're like, oh, the economy isn't going to be back in shape by 2021. No, it's not. It's not, because you've just crashed. You've put half the world in lockdown, and you've crashed 22 million jobs in a month in America alone. The largest economic engine in the world. If you don't think that that's just dropping a 1-ton boulder from 100 yards up into a huge lake, and you're not going to get rapid ripple effects from that for months and years to come, you're gravely mistaken. Gravely mistaken.
Yeah. Well, and also too, part of the problem is that we have not only a problem with big government, but big corporations as well. And the problem is that when you have a lot of these really big publicly traded companies, they are more concerned about protecting their stock prices than maybe they are providing jobs and, you know, keeping business open and things like that, because they can still have money coming in through the stock market, right? So the problem is they're going to be making decisions that are best for their stock prices and to avoid lawsuits. So I guarantee you a lot of these big corporations are going to be very hesitant to reopen and to, you know, be conducting business again very soon, whereas the smaller businesses would be more willing to do it, because, and also the small businesses can actually control the social distancing and, you know, be able to keep people 6 feet apart, not a lot of these big corporations. So I think if we can get back to small business, we could probably actually reopen our economy a lot quicker than relying on the big multinational corporations.
What troubles me, Jeff, we'll get to a report later if we have time in the podcast. Apple has over $200 billion of money on hand as of late February. They're floating the idea that they may start to lay people off in order to save money. What? That just goes to show you that they're putting profits and dividend shareholder meetings and stockholders ahead of their workers that they put out of work because they shut down. They made that decision of their own accord. And then they backed up governors doing these draconian means themselves. But yet, Apple's in China, they're still open. Ari Fleischer, the press secretary of the Bush administration, linked to a story from the New York Post that the U.S. naval ship Comfort and New York's Javits Center are still largely empty of New York City coronavirus patients. Combined, they've seen maybe 500 patients total. A wave of panic that we expected to occur that never came. And yet Governor Andrew Cuomo wants to say that Trump hasn't done enough. No, maybe you just peddled fear porn and panic, and you shut down your state and your city for something that you're going to find out was more widely spread and people had antibodies, and you tanked your state and city's economy in order to just be your own little tyrant. I think that that's what's going to happen. We're going to find later on that the death rate was below 1% when it comes to this. And so many people had antibodies that if we would have let this go, in about 4 to 6 weeks, it would have burned off through the population. And we're going to find out that people who died from it had pre-existing conditions already. And I hate to say that. Every life is precious, Jeff. And we want to save life, but we don't worry about cancer or heart disease. We don't worry about liver failure or kidney failure or all sorts, or heart attacks, or driving or being killed by drunk drivers. We don't paralyze our economy over those things, but we're doing it over some bat guano.
Yeah, well,
the common sense of that is just asinine.
Yeah, well, in the thing that we got to remember is that, and this is the thing that nobody's talking about in the press, is that we need to take this as a wake-up call to be healthy and to clean up our lives, to eat better, work out, be in a better place. Because in all reality, the majority of diabetes could be avoided by lowering our consumption of sugar and carbs and a lot of the junk food that's out there. A lot of the cancer could be avoided if we weren't using as many chemicals, if we weren't ingesting as many of the pesticides and all of that are in our food. The liver disease that's rampant, that's being affected by coronavirus, that could be affected. That could dramatically lower if we stop drinking so much in our country. There's so many things that we could avoid as a nation that would have made coronavirus not affect us nearly as much if we would just take a hold of our lives and stop going out and eating poorly and having bad lifestyle habits. If we could clean up our life, more than likely, this coronavirus crisis would not be a crisis. And that's one of the big things. Like the thing is that there's so many pre-existing conditions that they're the ones that are passing away. They're the ones that, again, in general, they're the ones that are passing away, that are having the serious health issues. And it's because of the way that this attacks our bodies. It's going after those specific weaknesses in our immune system. If we could actually clean up our life and actually be healthy and avoid a lot of the diseases that are created by our unhealthy living habits, maybe that alone could have been enough to actually combat this.
We can't do that, Jeff, because that would be common sense. And the number one industry in America now is healthcare. We can't be preventative.
Yeah.
Common sense? What's that? Breaking 911 tweeted video of El Chapo's daughter and Mexican cartels handing out coronavirus aid packages. My little birdie in the Illinois Department of Health, in a conversation 2 weeks ago, he told me, he said, if this devolves bad enough, you're going to see that the cartels are going to be the savior of the Mexican population, and they're not going to have any faith in their government. And that's already starting to occur. The Daily Caller reported that Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer called abortion life-sustaining during coronavirus. In related news, Lucifer smiles. Breaking 911 also reporting 44 Guatemalans deported on one flight from the United States last week have tested positive for coronavirus, a Guatemalan government official tells the Associated Press. And Jeff, I would say to that, thoughts and prayers. Don't break our laws and you wouldn't have to deal with something like that. Not our circus, not our monkeys, not our problem.
I mean, there is something like common sense where there's obey the laws. Now again, when we're talking about people that are getting coronavirus, we don't want them to. Like, obviously, we want to do everything we can to prevent this even from going to like a third world country or something along those lines. But at the same time, there are laws. This isn't an indictment on the breaking of the law, but it's still it's a very
consequence of it.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate consequence of doing this.
Exactly. The SCMP, the South China Media Post, is reporting that the Chinese economy shrank by 6.8% in the first quarter because of coronavirus. It's the first time it has shrank since 1976. But when I was reading the article, found out that there are economic experts that believe that the economy, that's the number, the 6.8% in the first quarter, that's the number that the Chinese Communist Party is telling you. Real data, economic experts believe that the economy shrank by 30% in communist China, which, after dealing with the problems with the tariffs and the trade war with Trump, I would not want to live in China. CNBC reporting that economies are risking a double recession crisis with government stimulus spending. Well, it's common sense. Keynesian economics, in the long scheme of things, doesn't really work out. But I guess we're going to figure out. I guess we're going to have to figure that out the hard way, Jeff. Let's just print money out of thin air, pay everyone, and see where it leads. Like Oprah, you get 1,000, you get 1,000, you get 1,000. Now your constitutional rights, you can give them away for $1,200.
I mean, again, this is the problem. They're reinforcing this socialistic ideology and really pushing big government solutions, and this is a problem. We shouldn't be relying on the government for our answers, and that goes for a lot of the laws that are being implemented, but then also the handouts. And conservatives have been saying that for years. But this is just another opportunity for them to take advantage of a situation to really push these leftist, progressive, big government solutions.
Sadly, G.K. Chesterton was right. When government removes God, government becomes the God.
Yep.
The U.S. Daily Mail reporting Land O'Lakes, during the coronavirus crisis, has removed the racist image of a Native American woman on its packaging after 99 years. Gotta go woke. The U.S. Daily Mail also reporting South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who has been outstanding in this fight for liberty. She has ignored a stay-at-home order in her state. She has preached constitutional values and liberties in her state. She's also endorsed the first statewide scientific study of hydroxychloroquine. They're going to test it on over 100,000 citizens of South Dakota over the next 4 weeks. Well, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, according to the U.S. Daily Mail, says people across the U.S. have given up liberties for a little bit of security. I think Benjamin Franklin would agree with her, Jeff. Business Week also reporting that the crash of the $8.5 billion global cut flour trade shows how quickly coronavirus is disrupting supply chains around the world. And that's just flours. The economic carnage from this worldwide, we're going to be picking up the pieces for years. Bloomberg News is reporting, and I've seen this myself, that people are not going with plant-based cleaners during this coronavirus outrage. They're going with the heavy-duty bleach. They're looking for the Clorox. I wonder why. U.S. Daily Mail reporting China is now not allowing U.S. companies to ship millions of surgical masks and coronavirus tests back to the States. Well, yeah, because they're in a showdown with you. So of course they're not going to allow that because you're blaming them for something they caused themselves and they want to stick it to you. So once again, you keep beating the drum, Jeff. Don't buy from China. Well, sadly, we're having to because we shipped all those jobs overseas after NAFTA in 1993. We don't make anything here anymore. We just consume it.
Well, the other side of it is that most people are buying disposable. Most of the disposable products here in the United States are made in China, right? So what you could do is you could save up your money, buy something that's not disposable that maybe you rewash, maybe you reuse, something like that. Usually those kinds of things can be made here in the United States. So it's more expensive, but in the long run, it's better quality. You can reuse it. It'll last a lot longer. In the long run, it'll save you money. But then also, too, you don't have to deal with all the China crap.
Amen. Amen. ABC News is reporting, according to an ABC News Ipsos poll, that among Americans who say that their daily routine has changed due to the coronavirus, 31% believe a return to normalcy will come by June 1st. I think that that's probably going to happen in a majority of states, but I think in hot spots or places that are run by hardcore leftist governors, you're going to see that that's not going to happen until after July 4th, Jeff. As we alluded to before, Mashable is reporting that according to Apple CEO Tim Cook, employees will have to brace for job cuts. I don't understand that when you have over $200 billion of cash on hand at the end of February, but they have to worship the almighty dollar. Conservative Review is talking about how Michiganders are not taking the governor's draconian overreach lying down. Multiple Michiganders have filed lawsuits saying that their constitutional rights are being violated. And I would say, Jeff, more cowbell to that. You need to push back. Sean Davis, the Federalist, also reporting that, and we'll stop on this for a little bit. He's reporting that a new study that was released Friday from Stanford Medical Centers is suggesting that the true population of Americans infected with the Wuhan coronavirus could be 50 to 85 times larger than what's been suggested so far by coronavirus testing, and that the lethality, the death rate, could be 50 to 85 times less than what we are reporting. This is the conclusion from Stanford Medical. Said, we conclude that based on the prevalence of sampling of a large regional population, and they tested over 10,000 people in Santa Clara County, the prevalence of SARS-CoV-2 antibodies in Santa Clara County was between 2.49% and 4.16% in early April. While this prevalence may be far smaller than the theoretical final size of the epidemic, it does suggest that the number of infections is 50 to 85 times larger than the number of cases currently detected and reported in the county. This new data should allow for better modeling of this pandemic and its progression under various scenarios of non-pharmaceutical interventions. While our study was limited to Santa Clara County, it demonstrates the feasibility of seroprevalence surveys of population samples now and in the future to inform our understanding of this pandemic's progression, project estimates of community vulnerability, and monitor infection fatality rates in different populations over time. It's also an important tool for reducing the uncertainty and fear about the state of the epidemic, which may have important public benefits as well. Thoughts on that, Jeff?
Well, when you think about it, we may already be closer to herd immunity than originally anticipated if those numbers are actually true. And so then that comes back to this idea that for the longest time, and I believe even still now, if you want to actually get tested for COVID-19, you have to be showing particular symptoms. There's all these check marks. But what we're realizing, and in all reality, what we've known since the beginning, but for whatever reason the government isn't saying it, is that a lot of people can have very mild to almost no symptoms of having COVID-19. But it's only particular people that are having the very serious reactions, and a lot of it is due to those pre-existing conditions that we were talking about earlier. So when you think about it, if 50 to 85 times more people have it than what we originally thought, I mean, that goes to show how low the death rate is with this thing, but then also too about how much closer we are to actually having herd immunity overall, because if we have that many more people that actually have it, that shows that so many people are getting coronavirus without showing symptoms. Thus, according to the science, they're now immune to it. If we can get more people to be immune to this thing, we could actually beat this thing here pretty quickly, I think.
I would agree. We'll get to a story tomorrow that shows that the prevalence of antibodies in the homeless population of Boston over the weekend was found to be at 30% of the entire homeless community. And this was in a hot spot in Boston where coronavirus has been blowing up. So I think that this is far more contagious, as Stanford says, 50 to 85 times more contagious than the common flu, but it's 50 to 85 times less deadly than the flu. And we've burned down the village in order to save it, Jeff. So now it's time for our funny anecdote. And then we'll get to our commentaries, and then we're going to have plenty of stories tomorrow to catch up on over the weekend, because if you've noticed, last week it took us about 2 days to get through all the stories over the weekend, and it's going to be the same way, but we'll come back tomorrow. We'll do it all over again. But ABC News is reporting that Iceland's Forest Service, and I sent this story to you over the weekend, Jeff, and you sent me a laughing meme about it. This is hilarious. Iceland's Forest Service is encouraging people who are lonely from social distancing to, quote, hug a tree. In times of social distancing, the Icelandic Forest Service is encouraging people to find comfort by hugging a tree. I can't even with this, Jeff. A guy said, I just put my cheek on the tree and I feel its warmth and the vibes just flow into me. Jeff, I can't even. I can't even.
Become one with nature. That's the solution to all of this.
Yeah. Just let the vibes flow through you, man. Just hug a tree, man. It's going to be okay. Mother Earth is restoring herself. Yeah, I can't. I can't. My commentary is going to come from Steve Dace. His commentary that he put out today, you can find at theblaze.com. It's his op-ed. It's entitled, "Tyrants Are Using the Coronavirus to Bully the American People. And it's time to put a stop to it. We are the rulers. We call the shots." And I would agree with Steve on what he said here, but I want to close with the final 3 paragraphs of what he had to say. He said, "This is a republic," said Benjamin Franklin, "if only we can keep it. That means we need to draw lines in the sand always and everywhere to protect the true nature of our relationship with government, a government by the consent of the governed, a government of, for, and by the people, made up of we the people. We are the rulers. We call the shots. And to that end, we are grateful that the president seems ready, willing, and able to return this great nation to its rightful owners. However, if you truly want to see him deliver on that instinct, don't just assume he will or even can. do it, or even that he can do it without you. In politics, you should always hold your allies to a higher standard than your adversaries. Why expect more from those who hate you than you do from those who claim otherwise? Trump is not our Mosaic deliverer. We are. He is to carry out our deliverance, not initiate it. Let us never forget that we were destined to be Americans by the hand of God and as children of God. We weren't built to be shut down. We were built to rise up and prove ourselves worthy of the lives, fortunes, and sacred honors sacrificed on our behalf long before any of us knew what a coronavirus was. And I would say amen. Facebook is shutting down protest pages that are being organized in various states, and they're calling it illegal activity. You need to make your voice heard, because these draconian means and these little governor tyrants that are taking away your constitutional rights think that they're saving you from yourself. That's not their job. They report to you. You're their boss. They're not your boss, and you need to make your voice heard.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I kind of want to close with this idea that we need to remember what the Constitution of the United States actually is. And I think that that's something that's really missing today. I've seen numerous conversations on social media and in the news and that sort of thing that are making the argument that any law that is upheld by the Supreme Court is thus constitutional, and that's something that we cannot agree with. The Constitution is supposed to be the law that all laws are supposed to follow. It's the limitations that are placed on the government to protect our rights. So if a law is passed and it's unconstitutional, thus that law is invalid. And that's one of the problems that I think a lot of conservatives are having with this idea of having a state of emergency, and thus that overrides the Constitution of the United States. As last I checked, that's nowhere found in the Constitution of the United States. There's not an exception that says you have freedom of speech except under certain circumstances, or that you have freedom to peaceably assemble except under certain circumstances. The Constitution is the Constitution. If you want to change it, you can change it. There's a way to do it. There's making an amendment. We could have a convention of states. There's multiple different routes that we can take in order to change the Constitution if you don't like it. If you want to provide an exception, make an amendment. Do it the right way. Don't just ignore it, because if all we're doing is ignoring it, which is what we're doing, essentially we're becoming an anarchist nation. We need to get back to rule of law. If you don't like a law, change it the right way. There's proper procedures in order to do that. That's something that I think that we as conservatives need to do a better job of articulating. We need to follow the Constitution. It gives us certain rights. It recognizes that they're given to us by God. Freedom of speech, the right to peaceably assemble, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms. Those things are given to us by God. They're not given to us by government. They're acknowledged by government. That's a key distinction that we need to make. So as we're moving forward and we're taking a look at all of these news stories and what's going on in the world, we need to be looking at it through a constitutional worldview. We need to understand what is right, what is wrong. Where is the government getting it wrong? The government's getting it wrong almost every single day, and saying almost as being very generous to the government. So remember what the Constitution says. Remember, there's not an exception to our constitutional rights. So that's, again, something that we need to remember. So, well, John, that was our news roundup for the day. Again, there's always a lot of news stories, but again, it's vitally important that we're constantly looking at this from a Christian and conservative worldview.
It is, because if you want to know where your rights come from, they don't come from government, who can then, if they are assumed to bestow those rights to you, they can take them away from you. No, your rights come from God, and that's alluded to in the Declaration of Independence, which was codified into law by the Constitution. And those principles and precepts and rights were found through biblical principles that are based in the gospel of Jesus Christ, because as 2 Corinthians 2:17 tells us, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And we also find out in the book of James that Jesus says, if the Son has set you free, then you are free indeed. And the Apostle Paul also alludes to freedom when he says that God allows us through his Son to escape from the chains of slavery, and that we're not shackled to sin anymore. So those principles of freedom and liberty come from the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we never should forget that. And you need to make your voice heard. You need to stand boldly without wavering upon the hope that we confess, because he who promised is faithful, and do so with gentleness and respect, but you make your voice heard.
Yep, exactly. So as we're wrapping up, I just want to remind everybody as well, tomorrow night we're doing our monthly episode of Connected, which is a show that is primarily for our plugged-in members here at the GK. But the live stream will be free for everybody. It'll be right here on Facebook tomorrow evening. It's going to be a roundtable discussion with myself, Sam Jones, Dustin Faulkner, and Dr. Mike Spalding. And you guys actually get to control the conversation. You get to control what we talk about. So it's kind of a free-for-all conversation. It's a lot of fun. So we'll be live streaming tomorrow. The recording will be for plugged-in members only. So if you're interested in that, go to gatekeepersonline.com/plugged-in for more information on that. $10 a month gets you membership and access to these exclusive perks. And then if you sign up for the annual membership, you get a free copy of our book, Social Injustice. So check that out, gatekeepersonline.com/plugged-in. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.